8:14 a.m., the 6th of August 1945. You are 12 years old, walking to school through the center of Hiroshima, Japan. The morning is warm, clear, the kind of summer morning that feels completely ordinary. In your hand, your school bag. In your head, what you are going to eat for lunch. You look up at the sky just for a moment because you hear something. A distant hum. A single aircraft. 8:15 a.m. The sky turns white. Not bright. Not like a flash of lightning. White. The entire sky. As if someone replaced the sun with something bigger. That is the last thing you see before the blast wave reaches you. This is the real story of what happened next, told through the voices of people who were actually there. The bomb, called Little Boy, detonated 580 meters above the city center at 8:15 and 17 seconds. It released energy equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. In the first millisecond, the temperature at the explosion's center reached 300,000 degrees Celsius hotter than the surface of the sun. Everyone within 500 meters of the hypocenter died instantly. Not from the blast, from the heat. Their bodies were vaporized so completely that in some cases, the only trace left was a shadow burned permanently into stone walls and concrete steps by the thermal flash. A human being, reduced to a shadow on a surface. Survivors who were further away between 500 meters and 2 kilometers described the flash differently depending on where they were looking. Akiko Takakura was 300 meters from the hypocenter and survived. She described the flash as a magnesium light, blinding white, instantaneous, with no sound. For the first second after the flash, she said, there was complete silence. No explosion sound, no screaming, just silence. Then the blast wave arrived. It traveled at 440 meters per second faster than sound. It leveled every wooden structure within 2 kilometers. Walls became projectiles. Glass became shrapnel traveling at bullet speed. People were lifted off their feet and thrown distances of 10 to 20 meters without any warning. Akiko later said she did not know she had been thrown. One moment she was standing. The next, she was on the ground, 15 meters from where she had been. She felt no impact. She simply changed positions. Survivors described the next 5 to 10 minutes as the strangest of their lives, not because of the chaos, but because of the silence that preceded it. Sunao Suboi was 20 years old, a university student, walking to school. He was 1.2 kilometers from the hypocenter. The blast knocked him unconscious. When he came to, he was lying in the street, surrounded by collapsed buildings and rising dust. He said, the first thing he noticed was that he could not feel the left side of his face. The skin of his left cheek was hanging free. He touched it with his hand, and his hand came away wet. He stood up, picked up his school bag, and began walking. He did not know where he was going. He just walked. That detail, picking up the school bag, appears in multiple survivor accounts. People reaching for their most ordinary possessions in the first moments after the bomb. Handbags, shoes, bicycles. The mind reaching for normalcy in a world that had just ended. Across the city, 70,000 buildings had been destroyed or damaged in seconds. Fires were starting everywhere, not from a single source, but from hundreds of small fires simultaneously ignited by the thermal pulse. Within 1 hour, these small fires merged into a firestorm, a self-sustaining weather system of fire so intense it created its own wind. People running away from fire found the wind pushing them back toward it. Yoshiko Kajimoto was hiding under a collapsed wall when she smelled smoke. She could not see the fire. She could only smell it getting closer. She spent 45 minutes deciding whether to stay or run. She ran. The fire reached the wall 10 minutes after she left. At approximately 9 a.m. 45 minutes after the bomb, it began to rain. But not ordinary rain. The rain was black. Thick, oily, dark drops contaminated with soot, dust, radioactive fallout, and the vaporized remains of the city fell across a wide area of Hiroshima for approximately 2 hours. Survivors who had crawled from rubble, desperate for water, opened their mouths to drink the rain. They did not know it was radioactive. Children collected it in their hands. People washed wounds with it. It stained skin and clothing a dark gray that could not be washed off for days. Setsuko Thurlow was 13 years old at the time. She was trapped under rubble when a soldier reached in, grabbed her hand, and pulled her out. She later described looking around her and seeing, for the first time, the scale of what had happened. She said the black rain was falling on people who were trying to help each other, and none of them understood what they were touching. That image, people helping each other in the black rain, not knowing, is one of the most haunting details to emerge from every Hiroshima account. By late morning, thousands of survivors were moving through the ruins of the city toward the rivers, which represented both escape routes and the only source of water. What they looked like, as they walked, is described in almost identical terms by every survivor and witness who saw them. Their arms were held out in front of them, palms facing downward. Not reaching, not gesturing, just held out. This was because of the burns. The thermal flash had burned the exposed skin of anyone within 2 kilometers, and the burned skin had begun to peel away in sheets. When burned skin hangs from the arms, the least painful position, the position that requires the least contact with the skin surface, is to hold the arms out and forward, palms down, letting the skin hang freely. Michiko Yamaoka was 16. She was 500 meters from the hypocenter. She survived. She described walking toward the river in this posture, arms out, skin hanging, and seeing hundreds of others doing the same. She said they walked in total silence. Nobody was screaming. Nobody was crying. They were all just walking. In the same direction. In the same posture. She called them a procession. Medical facilities that still stood less than 10% of Hiroshima's hospitals were even partially functional after the bomb were immediately overwhelmed. Doctors and nurses, many injured themselves, performed treatments with almost no supplies, no morphine, no bandages, no clean water. Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, director of the Hiroshima Communications Hospital, was himself injured in the blast. He treated patients for 18 consecutive hours before being treated himself. In his diary published later as Hiroshima Diary, he wrote that the hardest part was not the injuries. It was that the patients did not cry. They were too shocked to cry. They just waited, patiently, for help that was barely able to reach them. Here is something that is almost never included in standard history lessons about Hiroshima. In the weeks following the bomb, survivors who appeared to have escaped injury, people who had walked away, who felt fine, who helped others, began dying. Their hair fell out. Gums bled without cause. Bruises appeared on skin with no impact. Internal bleeding began with no external wound. Doctors in Hiroshima had no framework to understand what they were seeing. This was acute radiation syndrome, a condition that did not yet have a widely understood medical definition in August 1945. They called it atomic bomb disease. Some called it a ghost illness because it killed people who appeared to have survived. Between August and December 1945, an estimated 60,000 to 80,000 additional people died from radiation sickness, on top of the 80,000 who died on the day of the bombing. Sunao Tsuboi, the university student who picked up his school bag, was told by doctors in September 1945 that he would not survive the year. His radiation exposure was considered unsurvivable. He was given, at most, weeks. Sunao Tsuboi lived to age 96. He spent the rest of his life traveling the world, giving testimony about what he saw, and advocating for nuclear disarmament. He died in October 2021. To survive, Hiroshima was not the end of the experience. For most survivors called hibakusha in Japanese, which means explosion-affected people. It was the beginning of a second life, defined entirely by what they had seen. Hibakusha faced discrimination in Japan for decades. They were considered ill, possibly contagious, which they were not, or simply too associated with death and destruction to be welcome in ordinary life. Many hid their survivor status to find work, to marry, to live without stigma. Setsuko Thurlow, the 13-year-old pulled from the rubble, moved to Canada, became a social worker, and spent 60 years advocating for nuclear disarmament. In 2017, she accepted the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. In her acceptance speech, she said, and I want to read this carefully, because she said it better than I can, that the hibakusha's message was simple. We are not victims. We are survivors. And we have a responsibility to make sure this never happens again. She was 85 years old when she gave that speech. She had been carrying Hiroshima inside her for 72 years. Hiroshima is often taught as a fact, a number, a date, a decision made in a war room by people who never saw what their decision looked like from the ground. But from the ground, on the 6th of August, 1945, it looked like a 12-year-old reaching for her school bag. It looked like a university student walking in silence, with his skin hanging. It looked like a 13-year-old child in a field of rubble, with black rain falling on her face, not knowing whether the man pulling her out was real or a hallucination. What the hibakusha testimonies tell us when you sit with them long enough is not primarily about the bomb. It is about what human beings do in the first seconds after the worst thing imaginable happens to them. They reach for familiar things. They help strangers. They walk toward water. They are silent when they should be screaming. They hold their arms out in a procession and put one foot in front of the other. They do not give up. Almost none of them gave up. And 76 years later, a 96-year-old man who was told in 1945 that he had weeks to live stood in front of cameras and said, I want you to know what I saw. I want you to understand. I want this never to happen to anyone again. His name was Sunao Tsuboi. And the world is a little different because he kept walking that morning instead of sitting down. If this made you see history as something that happened to real people, not just a chapter in a book that is exactly what this channel exists to do, subscribe. Because next week, we go into the mind of someone who spent 30 days in total darkness.